I never thought that burying my husband would end with our children toasting their liberation 3 blocks down, with whiskey shots and ribeyes. While Charles's casket rested under the sloped ceiling of Shady Grove Chapel on September 18th, I stood alone at the front pew, my black clutch clenched like a weapon. My heels ached from standing during the eulogy, but I didn't sit. Couldn't. Not after Raymond's coworker quietly leaned over and said, "Did you know they're all at Midtown?" "I just saw them." "Midtown Bar and Grill." I nodded like I did, though the words felt like acid down my throat. I turned and looked. No Raymond, no Curtis, no Lila. Just floral wreaths, hollow condolences, and an usher who avoided eye contact. They'd skipped the final prayer, the casket closing, the ride to Southview. Skipped their father. When I got to my car, I didn't cry. I sat with both hands gripping the steering wheel until the heat in my palms numbed out the shame. The waitress at Midtown confirmed it. "Yep, 3 of them. Came in around 4, bought a bottle, celebrated something." She glanced at my black dress. I didn't explain, I just turned and left. My phone buzzed as I walked out. Group text from Lila. "Don't stress yourself, Mama. You need rest." No call, no explanation, just that. I went home alone. Our house in Cascade Heights still smelled like the catered brisket from the repast, but they hadn't even cleared their red cups from the porch. The kitchen trash sagged with bones and paper napkins. Someone had spilled soda on Charles's favorite chair, and the guest bathroom still had Curtis's cologne clouding the air. I walked into the bedroom Charles and I shared for 36 years. Shut the door and locked it. Then I crossed to the closet, reached up behind the folded comforter set, and pulled down the steel lockbox. Combination still the same. Our anniversary. Inside were 3 things I needed to confirm I wasn't crazy. Original 2004 deed to the house, our joint trust document, and the durable power of attorney papers signed and notarized. All with my name. Not theirs. Mine. They could toast whatever freedom they thought they'd won. I still had the paper. 3 weeks before Charles passed, I sat at his bedside at Emory Midtown, spooning ice chips into his mouth while the morphine pump hissed every 12 minutes. He couldn't speak anymore, not above a whisper, but his eyes still followed mine. I was reading to him from an old photo album, our anniversary in Savannah, the kids at Stone Mountain, one trip to Panama City where Raymond nearly drowned showing off. He smiled faintly at that page. My phone buzzed with a new email notification. I almost ignored it, but the subject line caught my attention. Fidelity transfer confirmation, final batch. It was from Curtis. Meant for Raymond, I'd later realize, but autofilled to me. Maybe out of habit, or maybe arrogance. The body of the message was brief and ugly. Funds cleared this morning. Divided evenly. Dad won't notice, not at this point. We'll keep the docs on standby in case the bank calls. Keep your story straight. Lila's already told them she's POA. Attached was a PDF, fidelity statement, August 26th. I opened it. The numbers hit like a slap. Charles's brokerage account, $286,000, gone. Withdrawals marked as beneficiary disbursements. Names listed, Curtis Washington, Lila King, Raymond Washington Jr. My name, nowhere. I didn't gasp, didn't scream. I lowered the album, shut it, and folded the hospital blanket higher over Charles's chest. His breathing had turned shallow, with a faint rattle in the chest. The nurse entered just then, cheerful, asking if I wanted more ice. I said yes. My voice didn't crack. After she left, I opened the email again and took screenshots of every screen. Then I forwarded it to myself and printed it the next morning at the library on Campbellton Road. 2 copies, one for my safe, one to hold. That afternoon I called Curtis, asked how work was going, if he planned to stop by. He lied, said he was just swamped but would come tomorrow. I didn't mention the email. I wanted to see if he'd lie without being pushed. He did, smooth and clean. I hung up and sat at the edge of my bed, feeling the exact moment the spell broke, the part of me that still believed they wouldn't dare, that blood meant loyalty. Curtis had dared. They all had. And they'd done it while Charles could still feel his hand in mine. The unraveling didn't start with the money. That was just the reveal. The real betrayal had unfolded slowly, so gradually that I kept second-guessing my own instincts. Like when food goes sour in the fridge one bite at a time, and you keep chewing, thinking maybe it's still fine. It started last Thanksgiving. I'd baked the sweet potato pies, cleaned the silverware, set Charles's oxygen tank on its cart by the table. I waited. Raymond called 2 hours late, said they were doing something low-key at Lila's place in Vinings. Didn't think I'd want to drive that far. Lila texted a heart emoji and sent a blurry photo of my grandkids holding up plastic cups. No invite, no explanation. Christmas, I sent out an email with our usual potluck assignments. Curtis responded 3 days later with a short, "We're doing our own thing this year. Love you." I replied with a single question mark. No one answered. Charles opened one gift that year. Pajama pants. From me. The kids never came. By February, I noticed Charles's cardiology appointments kept shifting behind my back. I'd call to confirm dates, only to learn they'd been rescheduled. When I pressed the receptionist, she said, "Your son usually calls now." I asked which one. She hesitated, then said, "Curtis." That night, I opened Charles's patient portal and found half the entries marked "attended," with notes I'd never seen. Someone had changed the primary contact, but the final fracture came in June. I was trying to send a photo of Charles in the garden, his last time standing upright, holding onto the rail with one hand and a cane in the other. When I opened the family group chat, it was gone. The Washingtons, our thread of 10 years. Every birthday, every recipe, every grandbaby's first steps, vanished from my screen. I texted Lila directly. "Did y'all start a new group? Mine's not showing." No answer that day. Or the next. On the third day, she replied, "We just thought it was better to streamline things. Less confusion." No apology. No link to rejoin. Like I was the one who'd aged out of relevance. I didn't argue. I printed that text too. Put it in the same folder as the fidelity statement. Because by then I understood what was happening. They weren't drifting. They were cutting loose the anchor. The morning after the funeral, I stepped over a plastic cup still sticky with orange liquor and surveyed what my children had left behind. Not grief, not comfort, just mess. Pizza boxes stacked on the credenza, a crushed cigar smoldered out in one of my good teacups, and 3 empty fifths of Crown Royal lined up like trophies on the windowsill. The foyer smelled like sweat, cologne, and disrespect. They'd come back here after the chapel, not to mourn, but to celebrate. I could almost hear it. Curtis holding court near the stereo, Raymond making crude jokes about life insurance, Lila scrolling her phone like none of this was real. They hadn't even taken their trash with them. A toothpick snapped beneath my heel as I walked toward the hallway. Charles had been dead less than 24 hours, and already the house felt foreign. Claimed. That was the word. Not shared, not remembered, claimed. I walked to the master bedroom and shut the door behind me. His slippers were still under the bed. I left them there, crossed to the closet, stood on the footstool, reached behind the spare pillows, and pulled down the lockbox. My fingers shook. Not with fear, but with something closer to focus. I punched in the code, our wedding date, and lifted the lid. Inside, nothing had moved. The 2004 deed to the Cascade Heights house, still folded with the blue ribbon Charles had tied around it the day we signed. My name typed clearly beside his, Marva R. Washington, joint owner with rights of survivorship. Not co-signer, not dependent, owner. Next, the notarized power of attorney documents from 2016, updated again in 2019 after his second heart attack. The first line, "This document hereby grants Marva R. Washington full financial and medical authority in the event of my incapacitation," signed in black ink, witnessed, stamped. I pulled each page out slowly and laid them across the bedspread like cards in a game of solitaire. This was my leverage, my proof. While they drank and toasted and schemed, I had the original documents that made me the gatekeeper of everything they were trying to seize. Their party was premature. The law was still on my side. By noon that same day, I was parked in front of a red brick building on Edgewood Avenue, half a mile from where Charles used to get his hair cut. Monica Hayes's office was on the second floor, tucked between a closed-down bookstore and a bail bonds shop. I'd first met her back in 2017, when Charles insisted we get ahead of the mess after his second hospital stay. He said, "Don't leave this world messy, Marva. Folks will tear through your name like junk mail." Monica remembered me right away. "Mrs. Washington, I'm sorry for your loss." Her voice was crisp but sincere. She didn't ask how I was doing, and I appreciated that. Grief didn't need to be performed. We sat across from each other at a narrow walnut desk, covered in manila folders and sticky notes. I handed her the documents from the safe, property deed, power of attorney, and most importantly, the amended trust we'd signed in September 2019. She slipped on her glasses, flipped through the pages with practiced fingers, and nodded as she read. "This version here names you sole executor, trustee, and primary beneficiary. All assets outside of probate are directed to you unless explicitly reallocated. No mention of your children in the body of the trust itself, only as contingent beneficiaries in the event of your death." She looked up at me. "Have any new versions of this been filed to your knowledge?" "No," I said, "but I have reason to believe they're trying." Monica made a note. "Do you have access to Charles's email accounts?" "I do, and I've seen some things I want you to look at, but not yet. First, I need to know, is this trust binding?" She tapped the last page, signed and notarized. "Witnessed by a third party. As long as we can prove your husband was of sound mind at the time, and I have no doubt we can, it holds." I exhaled through my nose. Not relief, not quite, but grounding, like hearing your name after being ignored too long. "Then, let's prepare for what's coming," I said. She smiled faintly. "We already are." I left that office with two things: a certified copy of the trust and a timeline. Monica would begin drafting a formal affirmation of my role as executor by end of week. That evening, after I returned from Monica's office, I set a kettle on and opened Charles's old Lenovo laptop at the dining room table. I wasn't snooping. I was handling logistics, pulling together names for thank you notes, obituary acknowledgments, and a few final calls to be made before the week ended. I expected spreadsheets, church rosters, maybe something from the Omega Sci-Fi brothers. What I didn't expect was a receipt for a yacht. The email subject line read, "Final invoice attached, Marlin Breeze Charter, Biscayne Bay." The sender was some reservations desk out of Miami. The body of the email thanked Mr. Washington for choosing their deluxe weekend package, included directions to the dock, and confirmed payment in full. I clicked on the PDF. Amount paid, $12,480, date of wire, August 22nd, payment method, joint checking, Fidelity Federal Notes, private event, no photography per client request. Charles was in hospice that week. I was there when he stopped eating, when they switched him to liquid meds and started dimming the room lights in the afternoon. He couldn't have made that booking. He hadn't spoken a full sentence in days, and I was feeding him broth with a straw. I opened our joint account online and scrolled through August. There it was, same date. A direct wire labeled MB Charter Services. I checked the linked IP for the login. Atlanta. Not Miami, someone local. Someone with access. I printed everything. Receipt, email, transaction log. Stapled them into a new folder labeled Unauthorized Activity. The kettle whistled, but I didn't move. I stared at the edge of the screen, where his name was still logged in. Charles E. Washington. The name he'd built respect on for 40 years. This wasn't just carelessness. This was theft wrapped in his name, signed with his still warm hands, and masked as celebration. Someone had taken $12,000 from a dying man's account to rent a floating party. During the same week, I was wiping his mouth and praying he'd hold on long enough for the kids to come see him one more time. They didn't come, but they had time to plan a boat. After finding the yacht invoice, I didn't sleep. I lay flat, eyes open, counting the ceiling tiles and listening to the refrigerator hum in the dark. By morning, I was back at the laptop. I needed to know exactly how they got the money out, not just where it went. That kind of transaction doesn't happen with a password and a whim. Not from a joint account with fiduciary flags. I logged into the Fidelity portal using my credentials. The activity log confirmed it. August 22nd, access granted under the name Charles E. Washington. Proxy authorization applied. Someone had uploaded a power of attorney document at 2:14 p.m., then initiated the wire transfer 8 minutes later. Too smooth. Too precise. I opened the document. It was a digital upload, signed electronically with a DocuSign banner across the top. The signature was one I recognized, except it wasn't recent. It was the same exact version of Charles's 2016 signature, from a hospital intake form we'd filed after his first surgery. I knew it because he'd signed that one after a morphine shot, and his W always dragged like a fishhook when his hand was weak. They had scanned that signature. Not traced, not forged with a pen. Scanned and lifted from an old file. I checked the metadata. The file had been created using Adobe Scan. Upload location: Curtis's IP address in East Point. That broke the final spell. I always wondered how far he'd go. Now I had an answer measured in dollars and a dead man's name. The email that had carried the upload to Fidelity came from a burner Gmail account, washington.legalproxy@gmail.com. No recovery phone, no location data beyond the bare minimum. But they hadn't scrubbed the attachment title, Charles POA updated CW2016 final.pdf. Those initials. Curtis always did like to mark his work. I downloaded everything, logs, timestamps, the document file, and copied it to a flash drive. Then I printed a physical copy and added it to the expanding file in my safe. This wasn't just selfishness anymore. It was calculated. A quiet, digital burglary, staged while I was spooning morphine syrup into a man who trusted his children to hold his name with care. They didn't just take money. They imitated authority, claimed his voice, and they thought I wouldn't catch it. By 7 that evening, I was parked outside Lila's Buckhead condo, gripping the flash drive in one hand and the printed wire record in the other. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't want her prepping a script. This wasn't a request for clarity. It was a test. I needed to look my daughter in the face and see if she'd flinch. Her building was new, money slick, glass-paneled lobby, concierge too young to question anything. I said, Unit 1402, and he waved me through without blinking. Inside the elevator, I studied the burn in my gut. Not rage, not even heartbreak. Just a steady, pulsing need to get out of the fog they'd thrown over me. Lila opened the door wearing a silk wrap and a Bluetooth in her ear. She gave me a tight smile, the kind she used on PTA moms and parking attendants, and stepped aside without speaking. The living room was spotless. Not a cup out of place, not a rug askew. She lived like nothing bad ever landed too close. I didn't sit. I handed her the paper and waited. She read the first half without reacting, then tilted her head like a therapist mid-session. "I don't know what this is," she said flatly. "Is this something Daddy set up? Don't lie to me." "I'm not lying, Mama. I'm trying to help you process." There it was, the old pivot. Make it about my emotional state. Push me onto the defensive. She'd done it since high school. Late for curfew? You're being dramatic. Caught in a lie? You're overreacting. Now it was applied to wire fraud. I stepped closer, held her gaze. You used his medical proxy. Forged. I know about the Miami transfer. I know the signature was pulled from a 2016 hospital form. I know it came from Curtis's IP address. Lila blinked once. I don't have access to his accounts. You do now. She sighed, loud and practiced. You're not thinking clearly right now, Mama. That line. The one they lean on when they need to discredit you without proof. Not a denial, not a defense. Just an erasure. I didn't push further. I picked up the paper, walked to her door, and paused just long enough to say, start thinking very carefully about how much you want your name on this. The next 48 hours, I moved like someone with an alarm clock wired to her ribs. I didn't eat much, slept less. I cataloged everything while the evidence was still warm, before they had the chance to scrub, spin, or pretend it never happened. If they wanted a war of memory, I'd make sure every file had a date and every lie had a backup. I started with screenshots, text threads, bank activity logs, email headers. I made folders labeled by name, by date, by offense. One for Curtis, one for Lila, one for Raymond, and one marked shared assets. I backed it all up to 2 drives, one stored in the safe, the other in a padded envelope addressed to Monica Hayes, sealed and ready to drop off if anything happened to me or the files. Midday Sunday, I printed the Fidelity withdrawal records and laid them beside the Miami charter invoice. That alone showed motive and means. But motive wasn't enough. I needed proof they knew what they were doing. Proof of intent. And that came, of all places, from Raymond's own voice. He'd called me by accident 2 weeks before the funeral. Meant to dial someone else, I guess. His voice was already in mid-story when I answered, laughing. Loud music in the background. He didn't notice I'd picked up. "Flip the old man's assets before the ink even dried," he said, then paused. "Nah, she doesn't know. She still thinks she's in charge. Let her stay busy with the hospice nurses." He laughed again. A hard, bright sound, not a slip, a brag. I saved the voicemail, downloaded it to my hard drive, then had it transcribed and notarized at the UPS store on Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard. The clerk didn't ask questions, just stapled the affidavit and slid it back to me. By the time I returned home, I had the beginnings of a legal timeline. Dated files, audio proof, digital forensics. I wasn't just angry, I was organized. The fog of grief had thinned, and in its place was something steadier. I could feel my back straightening as I filed the last sheet into its folder. They hadn't just underestimated me, they documented their own downfall. Tuesday morning, just past 10, my phone rang, with Monica Hayes' name flashing across the screen. I expected a routine update, maybe questions about account access or a follow-up on the notary log. Instead, her voice came clipped, urgent, none of the calm assurance she usually carried. "Marva," she said, "a second will's been filed. Raymond submitted it to Fulton County Probate late yesterday afternoon." I sat down without realizing I'd moved. What kind of will? A complete rewrite, dated 2 months ago, lists your children as equal beneficiaries, strips your name from financial control, names Raymond as executor. My fingers curled around the edge of the table. That's not legal. Charles wasn't lucid in September. I know. Which is why the filing includes a physician's statement affirming he was of sound mind. I've reviewed it. The signature is from an Eli French, MD. The name meant nothing to me. I asked for credentials. Monica was already ahead of me. He's not a neurologist or geriatrician, not even a primary care doctor. He's a retired podiatrist from Peachtree City, not licensed since 2018. I stood, heart pounding, not in fear, but fury. They hadn't even tried to make it look plausible, just found an old man with a title and a pen, slapped together a diagnosis, and filed it with a clerk, probably working through a backlog. Monica continued, "I've already flagged the inconsistency with the county registrar. We'll request a formal review of the physician's capacity evaluation. But you need to understand, this was a direct move to cut you out completely." I walked to the hallway and stared at the framed photo of Charles on our wedding day. I'd chosen it for the foyer years ago because he looked proud in it, straight-backed, hand on my waist, like we were planting a flag together. I imagined him now, unable to speak, eyes barely open, while his name was being used to bury mine. "They're not just trying to take money," I said quietly. "They're trying to erase me." Monica didn't argue. She didn't offer soft words or platitudes. She just said, "I've already drafted the first objection. I'll file by 4 p.m. The moment they see your response logged, the clock starts." And with that, the real fight began. I didn't want to believe it at first. The second will was brutal enough, but part of me still clung to the idea that there'd be some concrete truth I could show, a record that would stand on its own. So I called the hospital. Emory Midtown had security cameras in every hospice hallway, and Charles's room, like all of them, had a discreet, corner-mounted unit facing the bed, not for watching patients die, but to protect against mistakes, to track medication deliveries, to verify who entered and when. I asked for the footage from the week of August 20th. I was told it had to be requested formally, in writing, so I faxed a signed letter with the exact time frames. 2 days later, I received a polite, useless email. Due to an unexpected system malfunction, surveillance data from rooms 412 to 426 for the dates in question is unavailable. Unavailable. No explanation, no technician's report. Just an absence where there should have been hours of video. Proof that Charles had been unresponsive. That no physician named Eli French ever stepped foot in his room. That the signatures now tied to that forged will were fiction. I forwarded the message to Monica. She didn't reply with words. She sent me a screenshot from a digital forensics contact she'd used before. His note read, "Files were manually wiped. No automated log matches the deletion. Intentional removal." I stared at that sentence until the letters blurred. It wasn't a clerical error, it was a cover-up. Someone had removed the one objective witness left, time. I imagined Curtis or Raymond walking in with a flash drive and a smile, chatting up the security staff, maybe waving a badge from Charles's old employer. They wouldn't need to hack anything, just enough confidence and access. It's a strange kind of grief, realizing someone has erased the last footage of your husband's final days, not because they cared, but because they didn't want to be caught. I closed the laptop and sat back in Charles's armchair, which still carried his cologne faintly in the fabric. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I added a new tab to the file I was building, digital tampering, and wrote one line, surveillance evidence, deleted 8/25, confirmed by IT forensics. Pending subpoena. If they were willing to destroy proof, they feared it. That gave me more than sorrow. It gave me leverage. That night, I didn't turn on any lights in the house. I moved by memory, every step from the hallway to the back porch, traced by years of habit. I needed to be still somewhere Charles had touched, somewhere they hadn't yet poisoned. The garden was quiet, overgrown in spots, but the rose bushes stood tall along the fence line. His last planting, done on a chilly April morning when his legs trembled and I had to bring out the patio chair every 15 minutes so he wouldn't collapse. He'd told me, if they bloom after I'm gone, then I'm still here. They'd bloomed twice since. I sat on the bench under the trellis, hands folded, watching the faint silhouette of petals sway in the dark. That's when I remembered the journal. Not one of mine. His. Charles didn't write often, just short thoughts when something pressed on him. It was a soft-bound black book, kept inside the second drawer of his nightstand, under receipts and old cufflinks. I found it within minutes, still there, right where he left it. Most of it was mundane. Notes about his medication, half-started grocery lists, scribbled lines of scripture. But near the back, wedged between 2 pages dated only July, was a short entry that stopped me mid-breath. They think I don't notice. Curtis speaks to me like I've already gone. Lila wants to move the accounts, to simplify things. Marva's the only one who asks what I want. I told her to protect the home, protect the name. If they try to take it from her, it means they've already lost the part of me that mattered. I read it twice, 3 times. The pen had dug hard into the paper. No hesitation in the strokes, like he'd wanted the words to survive even if the ink faded. I held that page for a long time. Not because it gave me power, but because it gave me clarity. He'd seen them changing, had named it for what it was, long before they thought to strike. And he'd trusted me, not just with the paperwork or the logistics, but with the last scraps of his voice. I slipped the journal into my file folder and returned to the garden. They could erase videos, forge signatures, twist timelines, but they couldn't rewrite his hand. By Friday morning, I'd made up my mind. No more backroom warnings or quiet documentation. If they wanted to handle Charles's death like a backdoor heist, then I would drag the whole thing into daylight. I called Monica first, told her I wanted a formal will reading, public, controlled, with a neutral witness present and every lie tethered to evidence they couldn't talk their way around. She agreed without hesitation. I'll prepare the documents and bring hard copies. You're sure you want them all there at once? I want them in the same room with what they tried to steal. I drove to First Baptist Community Hall that afternoon. Reverend Gideon Wells had been Charles's friend since '84 and still wore his respect like armor. He listened as I explained what had happened. Every forged proxy, every unauthorized wire, every false signature. And when I finished, he nodded slowly and said, "I'll stand witness. But you know this won't bring them back to the table as your children. I'm not inviting them as children. I'm summoning them as defendants." We scheduled the reading for Sunday at 3 p.m. I went to the post office that same hour and mailed certified letters to all three, Curtis, Lila, and Raymond. Inside each envelope, time, date, location, and a line that read, "This meeting will confirm the validity of Charles E. Washington's legal estate documents on record as of September 2019. Attendance is expected." I kept the receipts, 3 green slips stamped and initialed, each one proving they'd been served. Later that evening, I called Mr. Tompkins, our longtime accountant, and asked if he'd be willing to attend. He agreed on the spot, said he'd bring original copies of Charles's last tax filings and the asset spreadsheet we'd updated before the second stroke. "I always liked that Charles wanted things neat at the end," he said. "Let's honor that." I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't dread keeping me up. It was calculation, the kind of steady, pointed thought that comes when your back's no longer against the wall, but you're finally ready to push forward. Come Sunday, they'd see I hadn't been waiting to forgive them. I'd been building the case. At 2:45 on Sunday, I walked into the community hall wearing Charles's navy suit jacket, the one he used to save for council meetings and funerals. It hung broader across my shoulders than anything I'd worn in years, but the weight steadied me. The room smelled faintly of old wood and lemon polish. Folding chairs were set in tight rows. The head table sat beneath the church's mission banner, honor, serve, protect, fitting. Reverend Wells stood to the side, Bible in hand, not for sermonizing, but for presence. Monica arranged her files on the table without a single glance at the door. Mr. Tompkins nodded politely, already holding the manila folder that held decades of our family's numbers, clean, filed, and true. At 3:02, they arrived. Curtis first, sunglasses on indoors like he needed to hide his eyes from God. Lila followed, wearing a blazer over yoga pants, still fiddling with her phone like this was a quick errand. Raymond trailed in last, slower, eyes bloodshot, stubble blooming across his chin. No one spoke. They took their seats in the front row, like schoolchildren called to the principal's office. No hugs. No small talk. Monica opened. Her voice was calm, sharp enough to split the air. She presented the original 2019 trust, notarized and stamped. The power of attorney papers, naming me as sole executor. She outlined the contested will Raymond had filed, then dismantled it in 3 quiet strokes. The signature inconsistency, the invalidity of a podiatrist diagnosing mental fitness, and the confirmed erasure of surveillance footage from Charles's hospice room. Then she presented the financial records, the $12,480 party boat wire, the forged DocuSign file with the lifted signature, the IP address logs linking the file to Curtis's apartment. Curtis finally broke. "It was an early inheritance. We were just getting ahead of things." Monica didn't flinch. "So you wired funds using a medical proxy from a man in hospice care and thought no one would notice?" She pressed play on the recording. Raymond's voice echoed across the room. "We flipped the old man's assets before the ink even dried." Silence fell. Lila stopped tapping her screen. No one stood. No one denied it. I looked each of them in the face, one by one. I didn't ask for apologies. I let the evidence do the talking. They'd orchestrated a theft. I'd built a reckoning. Monica closed the laptop, folded her hands, and let the silence hang until it pressed down on the room, like humidity before a storm. Reverend Wells stepped forward slowly, his voice neither soft nor sharp, just steady, the way only men who've buried too many friends learn to speak. "Mrs. Washington," he said, looking directly at me, "you've shown great patience and great injury. It is clear you've been deeply wronged. Not just financially, but as a mother, as a wife, and as a keeper of this family's legacy. He turned toward the three of them, not with anger, but with a kind of tired disappointment that cut deeper than yelling ever could. You may disagree with her decisions. You may resent her role. But what I saw here today, this was not confusion. It was calculation. Then he did something none of them expected. He asked them to stand. Curtis shifted in his seat, like a boy caught cheating in class. Lila's lips parted, ready to object, but no sound came out. Raymond sat motionless, like the weight of his own voice on that recording had finally settled in his chest. Eventually, they stood, one by one. Before this congregation of witnesses, Reverend Wells said, gesturing toward the small group of neighbors and friends seated along the back wall, you owe her a word. No one moved to speak first. For once, the three of them didn't compete to control the room. Lila looked away. Curtis dropped his sunglasses into his palm and stared at the floor. Finally, Raymond muttered, "We went too far." "You lied," I said, not raising my voice. "You stole. You used your father's name to stage a betrayal. I want you to understand the scale of that, not just legally, but humanly." Lila's voice cracked. "We thought you'd step aside. We thought you were holding on too tight." "I wasn't holding on," I said. "I was holding it together." They didn't apologize in the way children do when they've scraped a knee and want comfort. They apologized the way cornered adults do. Quiet, mechanical, avoiding eye contact. But the power shift was done. I didn't need their sorrow. I had the truth in print, on tape, and in the hands of every witness in that room. By Wednesday, the silence had broken. Not in my house, but in theirs. The kind of silence that comes after exposure, when consequences start to move faster than excuses. Monica called just after noon. Her tone was less clinical than usual. Almost satisfied. Metrobank launched an internal audit, she said. Curtis was terminated this morning. They cited breach of ethics and pending investigation. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to hear whether he argued or cried. A man who forged his dying father's proxy should have known better than to leave digital fingerprints on bank equipment. He brought it on himself. Later that afternoon, a voicemail came through from a number I didn't recognize. Lila's husband, Marcus. We'd barely spoken beyond birthdays and the occasional holiday table grace. His voice was calm, but it carried the edge of a man betrayed in his own home. "Mrs. Washington," he said, "I just found out Lila used our joint credit line to lease an Audi. Dealership says it was signed in her name, but processed using my mother's ID. I didn't want to believe what I saw at the church, but now I can't not believe it." That sentence stayed with me. Can't not believe it. I didn't return the call. Not out of spite, but because I knew there was nothing I could offer that would soften where he was heading. Truth always costs more on the way out than it ever did to ignore. I took a walk around the block after dinner, the first time I'd left the house without paperwork in over a week. I passed neighbors who'd sat in the back row of that reading. Some nodded, some didn't know what to say, but there was a shift in the way they looked at me now. Not as a grieving widow or a sidelined matriarch, but as someone who had won a fight no one else knew she was in. That night, Monica emailed me the confirmation. Raymond hadn't responded to the county's notice of objection. His false will had been formally disqualified. All that scheming, undone with one stamp from the clerk's office. Their plan had unraveled not because I shouted louder, but because I documented everything. They assumed silence meant weakness. It never did. October 2nd, 9:47 a.m., I stood in front of the clerk's window at the Fulton County Recorder's office, holding the updated deed in one hand and my driver's license in the other. The clerk didn't say much, just typed in a few keys, printed the verification sheet, and handed me a stamped copy with the words "Ownership Transfer, Sole Title Holder" across the top. My name was the only one on that paper now. Not as a dependent, not as spouse of, but as sole legal owner of the Cascade Heights property. I didn't smile, didn't tear up. I just folded the document, slid it into my leather folder, and walked out with my back straight and my key in my pocket. A new key, cut the previous Friday after the locksmith installed a reinforced deadbolt and changed every lock in the house. No spares given. On my way home, I stopped at the post office and picked up the envelope Monica had overnighted. Court-stamped copies of the 5-year financial restraining order, each of their names listed in bold. The order barred them from initiating any transactions involving my name, my accounts, or any remaining estate matters until October 2030. Violation would result in criminal charges, not just civil penalties. I placed one copy in the safe, one with my attorney, and one in the glove compartment of my car, just in case. Back at the house, I opened the front door, using that new key. The lock turned smooth, quiet, unfamiliar in the best way. I walked through the foyer, noticing, for the first time in weeks, the quiet dignity of my own home, the grandfather clock ticking, the slight creak in the hallway floor, the hum of peace that can only exist when the vultures have flown off. I walked to the garden, sat on the bench by the roses, and unfolded the deed. The bushes were fading now, end of season, but they'd held on longer than I expected, just like Charles did. For the first time since he passed, I felt not just grief, but ground. A rootedness. Everything they tried to claim, bend, or bury had been pulled back, one form, one signature, one boundary at a time. I was no longer holding things together. I was holding them in place. Curtis texted the next morning. "Can we talk?" I let it sit unread. Lila emailed 2 days later, subject line, "Mom, let's meet halfway." But she never defined what halfway meant. Raymond didn't contact me at all. I assume the silence is part guilt, part strategy. Either way, it no longer moves me. Monica confirmed the estate audit had officially closed in my favor. Every disputed asset returned. Probate file marked resolved. Her last email came with a short note. "Let me know if you'd like to set up protections for future transfers, just in case." I told her I'd think about it. Truth is, I'm done preparing for ambushes in my own home. The photos of Charles are still up. His slippers still sit by the nightstand. But everything else has changed. Not because I wanted it to, because I forced it to. Inch by inch, paper by paper, the betrayal didn't make me smaller. It made me sharper. They thought they were writing me out, replacing me. But they never understood the structure they were standing on had my name chiseled beneath it, quietly, permanently,